Life is full of ambiguities. For all the information we have access to, there's still a lot of unknown in the world. The unknown is full of ideas and concepts that are extremely difficult for people to comprehend. A good example is the idea of space-time. Space-time is a four-dimensional model combining both the three dimensions of space and the fourth dimension of time. It's something that, for the average human, myself included, is too complex to understand, yet it can be explained in a grounded manner through the use of math and science. When it comes to other ambiguities, there aren't very many proven explanations for them. The concept of time, specifically the future, is somewhat incomprehensible due to its vagueness. Over time, people have come to use superstition to fill those ambiguities with more fathomable concepts. Every superstition has always been just that, a superstition. However, people tend to correlate coincidences with those superstitions. They have a bias and only choose to perceive the occurrences that prove superstitions to be true. One such superstition that has been developed throughout time is fate. It's a superstitious concept used all around the world to explain the ambiguous future. Although destiny and fate are both universal concepts, the symbolism for them varies among different cultures. As it turns out, a lot of cultures don't actually have a consistent or accurate symbol or analogy for time and fate. Japanese culture is one culture that does happen to have a symbol for fate: a red thread. Countless pieces of Japanese media use the red thread to symbolize an inevitable destiny and the flow of time. One of the most prevalent pieces of media that does so is Makoto Shinkai's Your Name. What Shinkai uses the analogy for is not just to illustrate the very idea of fate, but his defiance of that idea, a sort of rebellion against it. Shinkai's film works to highlight that the entire concept of fate itself, on a fundamental level, is nothing but a flawed superstition. There are other ways that the vagueness of the future can be more comprehensible. Probability can allow people to predict the future, although it doesn't necessarily guarantee accuracy. Predicting the future follows the same basic rule as predicting a series of events in history. Specifics are lost in time, and the events of history leading up to the present can only ever be generalized, as accuracy is lost when attempting to predict minute details. In other words, the more detail, the more room for inaccuracies. Even if probability is not a sufficient way of conceptualizing the future, fate still isn't either. The reason superstitions are popular is because they are an easy answer, not because they are a sufficient one. When superstitions are used to understand incomprehensible subjects, it raises a lot of issues. Loopholes, if you will. These loopholes are commonly referred to as paradoxes. For example, when trying to fathom omnipotence, the appropriately named omnipotence paradox arises. If an omnipotent being can do anything, can it create a boulder that it cannot lift? If it creates the boulder, then it can't lift it. Therefore, it can't be omnipotent because it can't do something. If it can't create the boulder, then it also isn't omnipotent. Truthfully, omnipotence is really not something humans should be able to grasp. In a similar way, the concept of fate creates two paradoxes. 1. If the future can never be 100% accurately predicted, as stated previously, how can every aspect of our future be determined in advance by fate? And 2. The more problematic paradox. If every action we take will lead to fulfilling our inevitable destiny, do we really have free will? Or are we just living to follow a set path? In Your Name, Mitsuha's fate was a morbid one. She and all of Itamori were destined to meet their unfortunate demise on October 4th, 2013, when a piece of Comet Tiamat broke off and crashed down to Earth. Somehow, whether it was fated or by the hands of some deity is unclear, Taki's and Mitsuha's red threads of time became intertwined. Because of that entwinement, Mitsuha and all of Itamori were saved from its fate. The usage of a red thread to represent their entwined fate is common throughout the film. In the opening, it represents how they are tied together and how even the passage of time could not break their bonds. Mitsuha's ribbon is also a partially red braided cord. She uses it to hold up her hair until she gives it to Taki as a constant reminder of their encounter. That cord is traded back and forth between the two as they take steps closer to breaking free of fate. Mitsuha gave it to Taki the day before the festival, which may have been a catalyst for their threads of time becoming entangled. Taki realized how he could attempt to save Mitsuha once he remembered what their braided cord represented, and at the end of the movie, he returned it to her so that she could defy her destiny. Another scene where the red thread is used is in the vision Taki has when he drinks Mitsuha's Kuchikame sake. He follows the timeline of her life alongside the red thread. Mitsuha's life encapsulates the very idea of fate. Through it, your name presents the concept, but it in no way attempts to solve the paradoxes that fate brings. It instead brings a universal solution to those paradoxes and the new questions that the movie itself introduces. Those questions being, if Taki was able to save Mitsuha, was her death actually her fate? Or was it fate that Taki's thread of time would intertwine with hers, allowing him to rescue her? And if the latter is true, how could her destiny be fragile enough to break so easily? The answer to it all? Well, neither. Neither was fate, because fate does not exist. The story of Mitsuha and Taki presents such a simple answer to such a convoluted issue. It shows us that a belief in destiny has absolutely no basis. The concept of fate tells us that time is like a braided cord, one that we are traveling along for an indefinite period, following a specific and linear path. Taki and Mitsuha realized the inevitable darkness that awaited them in their cords, so they ripped them apart and found a new one to follow. The truth is, we are not following along a predetermined thread of time. We're here, at the end of our braided cord. All of the cord behind us is already determined, and the results of each braid is unchangeable. However, in front of us is entirely open. We have the choice to braid our threads in any way we want, making decisions each and every moment that change our future braids. If we don't want to choose any of the threads available to us, we can bring new ones into the braid. Your name is not about the inevitability of fate, nor is it about explaining the unexplainable. It's about how the bond between two people was able to transcend the bindings of fate, how our futures are not absolute, and how the union of time is determined by each of our actions, not by destiny. Just as Mitsuha and Taki did, I encourage you to find your own path. After all, if you believe that you're only destined to fail, all you will ever do is fail. So braid your cord of time in your own way. Choose a path right for you, and rebel against the shackles of fate by knowing that those shackles never existed to begin with.